Welcome, United family, and all of you all who are joining us on this evening. I pray all is well with you and your families at home and wherever else that they may be. Thank you for taking the time out this evening. Listen, real quick, reach out to someone, send them a text, share this, tell them, hey, join us tonight during Power Hour as we continue to have dialogue around the protests, around the pitfalls, and around progress that's needed based upon what's happened in our nation and across this world. So family, reach out to somebody. Listen, you can like, you can comment, you can share. If you have a question that you would like us to address on tonight, please submit your question in the comment section and we'll make sure that we get your question and try to address it on this evening. So again, welcome. I'm Pastor Kevin Rushing of United Baptist Church, and I'm honored and pleased on tonight to have the mayor of the city of Akron with us, Mayor Dan Horrigan. Thank you so much for being here on this evening, Mayor.
Well, thank you, and I second your wishes of prayer and safe travels, and especially as you deal with a lot of the different things that are going on. And I want to add that if the list of questions is long, which they may be, if we don't get to all of them tonight, you have my email address. If you can please forward them. If they want to tag an email, or I can send them back to you, whatever that works. I hate to leave questions unanswered, especially if we don't get to them, or maybe we can explain it more fully, just to give a little bit of context and time. So let us know, and we'll make ourselves available to be able to answer them.
Will do. Thank you so much for that, Mayor. Also, our brother and friend, Senator Vernon Sykes, was going to try to be with us this evening. He got stuck in session down in Columbus. So my brother, please be safe. We're praying for you during this time. So tonight, you're stuck with me and the mayor as we're going to have some dialogue and some discussion around the things that are happening in our country, in our state, in our very city. So, Mayor, I just want to start off by tonight by just asking you, again, you're your father, you're a man, you're a leader. But honestly, how do you feel about what's occurred in our nation, in Minneapolis, and how it's having an impact even on your city?
It's when you look at it, it's beyond reprehensible, and I think the visceral anger and pain really, I think, has kind of been exposed. And I think COVID started with some of those things and some of the disparities, that affected African Americans.
So, Mayor, real quick, because I want everybody to hear you. Check your lapel again. Is it on green for me? Is it?
Green. Does that say green? No.
Okay. Because we want everybody to hear you tonight. Okay,
that says green. I'm sorry. Okay. Yeah. All right. I'm not tech savvy, but we'll go from there. Yeah. When you watch something like that, like as a city and as a country, we're dealing with a global pandemic and really trying to change that focus of saying, okay, let's, it affected churches and businesses. Hey, you got to stay home. You have to do all these things, and it really kind of it put a lot of pressure on the community. And then when something like that happens, and rightfully so, people they're more than upset. It's more than, hey, that's enough. They want to see some sort of change of how we do things, across government, business, nonprofits, I think the whole spectrum. And it really is up to us as public servants, is that if we're not listening, we're in the wrong position. And I think people want to see that immediate change to how all of that works. There's no doubt. I mean, we declared racism as a public health crisis in the city of Akron. Many cities across the country and even the state of Ohio did. The state of Ohio, we're working with State Representative Amelia Sykes to do that same thing in Ohio. It's not like it just exists here, but it's really going to be I think a difficult conversation for a lot of people to say, hey, this is the way I've always acted, but it's always been in a protective mode. And as those protests have come out, and we really have tried to set up that safe space, whether it be downtown and marching through the city to be able to do that. I've marched with them. I've been with them. I've knelt with them in solidarity to do just that. We need to be responsive to this, not just me, but I think across the spectrum, because that change is coming. So either you want to ride the top of it or really get swallowed up by it. And as a city, we have to be that ally that says, we're here to do this and to not protect the status quo and not protect just the norm, because it's more than just enough. And I think Minneapolis proved that. And there's a lot of people that have been in this space for a lot longer than I have. It's not like we didn't recognize it. And it seems like even the work around equity, when it comes to infant mortality, when it comes to investing in neighborhoods and parks, that really only scratches the surface of that wound. And so if we're not willing to have that conversation, President Somerville, Margot Somerville, we're going to put together a task force fairly quickly to start to look across the city of how that all works, and how we tear down those walls. I mean, I hate to quote a song, but you have to tear down those walls, because I think it's, if we don't, then I just think we're moving in the wrong direction.
So you touched on something there, and I want to go back to it. I know a lot of our focus today is on the protests, on the things that are happening or that that's happened to George Floyd, and the impact it's having on the nation. But let's take a step back for a minute. You mentioned COVID-19. What's going on in our city? I know we're reopening some things and taking some steps, but maybe you can give us an update as far as that impact and how we're moving forward with that.
Even from the very beginning, we had a daily call with the governor's office and the director of public health for quite a while, probably all the way through April into May, just talking about what are the safe things to do? What's the recommendation for the community? And our country literally shut down for a significant number of days, and we couldn't move. And we could really communicate, but we couldn't go to the places that we wanted to go. Couldn't go to stores, couldn't go to church, had to wear a mask, had to take all these protections. But it was really to save lives. It was really to stop people from getting infected. And I think Ohio did a pretty good job. And as we've always taken those health guidelines from the director of health, whether it be the state of Ohio or Summit County. And so each steps they've talked about reopening because infection rates have gone down. I think when you start to see, but now they're starting to tick back up, not necessarily in Akron, but across some regions in the state of Ohio, because the goal was always, we cannot flood the hospital like happened in New York, like happened in Detroit, with that many people who need to be on a ventilator, because they would have been overwhelmed. So they really positioned or turned themselves fairly quickly to say, we're ready for as many patients as we can based on our region and how we go from there. But now that you see things start to open up, and I was proud of the community because I do see a lot of people wearing masks. I see some people not, and it kind of gives me pause to say, and it's not, I'm not criticizing you, but really I think it's a gesture of saying, okay, I don't want to spread this just like I don't want somebody else to get it. Yeah. And it's not an indictment on the person that you are, but I just would have liked to have seen people, a higher percentage.
More of a care or concern.
I think so, right, yeah. And as I go to the store now, or if I go to church, or if I go somewhere, I do see still a pretty good percentage, but now that we're starting to gather more and parks are opening and golf courses are opening, and now that we have these protests down there, I mean, you're still having a lot of people. COVID is still here. It's not gone anyway. There's not a vaccine yet. So that really does still worry me as a community. And it's not to put anything aside, but I'm just worried about the public health side of it too, and how we go forward. So you'll start to see some things open up. I think the last few things, and then we all pray and we all knock on wood that we don't see a spike in some of those infection rates, because it happens, it has affected some more than others, specifically in the African American community when it comes to some of those, comorbidity issues. We haven't done a good enough job, I think, on the public health side, not currently, but how do we protect people from those, and how do we get them the services that they need so we don't overwhelm hospitals? And it really is, I kind of liken it to a bowl of spaghetti. It's just all interconnected in there, and it makes a big difference on how we overwhelm the hospitals or how we overwhelm public health. And we've all had to become, I think, experts in epidemiology fairly quickly about how this works. But it's still there, and it still gives us, I think, plenty of worry.
So I want to talk about the other issue tonight.
Sure.
I'll simply ask, I think, what many constituents want to know, with many members of even this congregation, simply, is it safe?
And you have to ask yourself one question: is it safe to do what? You know what I mean? And if is it safe to go to church? I think yes. I think if you practice those social distance guidelines, you wash your hands and you wear a mask. I mean, fellowship has become completely different. As I don't have to tell you on how that may work. Is it safe to go to the store? I will go. Is it safe to go to a restaurant if you're far enough away? I will go. I've only done it once, but we're starting to feel like maybe it's a little more safer out there. Yes, I do think it's safe, but is it safe to be in a party with 100 people with nobody wearing a mask? Personally, no. I mean, that's my personal opinion. Somebody's going to have to make a decision for themselves. Is that I don't think it's that big of a deal. I'm going to go, or I don't feel safe doing that. So it comes down to a personal decision. I know where I feel safe and where I don't. There's some things that you have to be at regardless of whether you feel safe or not. And that's what we signed up for. And I'm okay with that. But I think it's safe. It's just I would continue to take those precautions when it comes to washing your hands and social distancing.
So again, share, like, comment, put your questions out there as, again, me and the mayor continue to have this dialogue around what's happening in our country. Mayor, one of the things that's come up recently when you start talking about what steps we could take is training as it relates to police officers, how they engage the community in which they are sworn to protect and serve. With that training, and again, I'm not expecting you to have all of the answers, but as it relates to that training, is it possible when it comes to the interaction that police have with the community, that there is a review of that cultural or that diversity training that police go through, and that review is either done by the council members that the community has collected, or even by some of the community members themselves, so that they are aware that when officers say we do go through a cultural or diversity training, they actually know what that is.
And as we've gone through that list of the implicit bias training, the mental health training, all those CITs, all those different things, I think we've done a pretty good job of saying, okay, these are the trainings that we need to go through. I don't think it's something that you can go through just once. I think it's like anything else. It's like education. I think you continually need to either brush up or go back through it again. Some of the ideas that we've had out there, I mean, we've had a police auditor for quite a while, and we're actually looking or taking some steps to say, okay, how do we make that more effective to say, you know, if we're doing these things and we're going out, you know, adopting body-worn cameras, I think was a significant step in that transparency part of it. And it's not really about necessarily the person who goes out, because when you go out on a public safety call, and I don't care if it's police or fire, you're probably getting somebody probably at their worst point. And there are some things that you should be able to do, and you should do on each one of those. Obviously to keep the situation safe, but also yourselves, but how you do it and how you interact with people. I've had a long history of saying, you know what, we care about the things that we do. Well, that's also an institutional thing that needs to permeate, I think, across the city to be able to do that. I think in some efforts we've been okay. In other efforts, I think we need to, I think, succinctly get better. And I don't mind people judging us by saying these are results. It's more than just a metric anymore. I think you need to have some sort of, whether it's, you know, people have talked a lot about a citizens review board. And people have talked about auditors, and those are available all over the country. And some work some places and some don't. But it really takes a cultural buy-in from the city to say, okay, this is the way we're going to move forward to be able to do this, because I think because of it's important. So I think we can always do more training, but when we say that, and this is not an excuse to say, hey, listen, we can't do this. You know, we specifically did an HR director, you know, in the beginning of 2016, because our efforts were kind of all over the place. And we said to ourselves, and there were a lot of people part of the conversation, how are we going out and recruiting? Because I think our city workforce should look exactly like the city. And so just 2 short weeks ago, we hired probably the most diverse class in a generation, which is a great first start, because I think some of this younger generation is eventually going to have to take over. You know, I think they're more sensitive to those type of things when they need to go out and interact with the community. Not to saying that the older ones aren't, but in each generation, there's that turnover of a younger leadership. And I think we're starting to see that. We can always do better. We can always be more transparent. And I think we can always serve the community better. And that's our focus, is to be able to continue to do that.
Well, and along those same lines, Mayor, and you bring up some excellent points, when it comes to policing communities, and I think you will hear even more today that more communities would love to have officers in their community that reflect the community in which they reside. But the truth of the matter is, and I don't expect you to be able to give us exact figures tonight, but I would almost assume that, you know, when you look at the makeup of the police force, that there is, you know, a minority of African Americans serving on that police force. And again, we need to look at those realities as to why that is the case. And I think you would agree with, or at least in my view, and having the conversation with others, if you had a conversation with a 11, 12-year-old at this point, African American, growing up in today's, they'd probably tell you, I don't want to be a police officer.
Absolutely.
So how do we take steps to encourage? And again, I think one of the things we have to take a look at, and I know I've heard you mention before and take steps toward, but you know, there could be instances where young African American men have made a mistake in their youth that clearly would prevent them from potentially being an officer in the future. Is that something we take a look at, or holistically, how could we address the diversity? So to your point, the communities in which the police work in reflect the community in which they reside.
Well, we have taken steps. I think we need to even, and I don't necessarily mean officers in schools, even though that's a school security program, but also I think, being with kids, at an earlier point in their life to show them, that this is an honorable profession, or this is something that we want you to do. And I've asked younger African-American males to say, listen, I've got a fireman and I've got a policeman. Which one do you want to be if you had your choice? I'm going to pick fireman every time. Not every time, don't get me wrong, because if you have a history, if your family members in there, that's going to, exactly, and that's going to work. We've done some significant things because we're not looking for perfect people. I completely understand that people make mistakes. And even through this last review process, we've shortened our time frame to be able to say, okay, was that mistake 8 years ago, or was that mistake last week? And so we shortened that time frame to say, okay, the mistake can happen within a certain amount of time, but necessarily can't happen last week. It has to happen within, and I think, and then don't quote me on this, I think it has to be within 6 months. If it's within 6 months of that prospective hiring date, it also, as they go through those background checks and being able to say, okay, we know this happened, what's the explanation? So we did, I think, a much more thorough job of looking at some of those things and kind of saying to ourselves, okay, perfection's not going to ever be there, but how do we make sure that because the end goal, I think, is hiring, officers that look like the rest of the community. We've made a decent start, don't get me wrong. I think it's just a step on a pretty tall ladder to be able to do that. It's also changing the concept of saying to a younger man, this is, if you don't want to do this, explain to me why. I want to hear an explanation of what and it could be because of this, or this. Let us help you try and get around some of those things. It's a perception thing also. And we all know a lot of officers, both black and white on the police force. Our numbers need to be better, and I think that's our continual goal through having a structured program to say, and it's not just my voice in the conversation. This is a diverse voice around the table of saying, these are the ones that we want to go forward, but we also need a more diverse voice to say, okay, these are the people we're actually going to pick, and that's a continual process. It doesn't happen just structurally overnight, and I know people want to say, well, no, it needs to happen yesterday. We're going to go as fast as we can to be able to do that too, and that's been my commitment from day one when it comes to human resources, because people are, and I hate to say they're assets, but you're not. You have to cultivate them as an employee. We want them to grow in their job, become better, and we want them to stay. I want you to stay 30 years. I want you to be able to move to that portion and say, now I can buy a house, now I can do those things. They're all goals, but I think we need to train employees better, and then it has to reflect and look like the city.
So again, I just want to give the mayor a breather again. You can like, share, comment. Please submit your questions. Again, we definitely want to hear from you and share your questions with the mayor. Mayor, there's another thing that's been going around recently, talking about defunding police. And I think you do have some advocates who literally mean they want the police department defunded.
Correct.
I think what the gist of the conversation is really around is reappropriating funds within the police department to other things that could take place. What's kind of your thought around that process, or
it's so new. And okay, maybe it's not new. Maybe somebody had been talking about it for years. I would say that it necessarily didn't creep onto our radar so quickly. I mean, not that we haven't heard it, not that we haven't looked at it. I don't like the verb, because I think it makes it look like, we're just not going to have any police department. And I don't think that's their goal either.
Because that's a problem.
Exactly. You run into a whole nother different issues. Now, can we do better things, and how do we look at, whether it's calls for service? Because we average about 600 a day of calls for service. And that's one of the things, is if you dial 911, somebody's going to come. Whatever that may be. I think we've asked, whether it's the fire department or the police department. Chief Chucker came to me about in 2017, and this was in the midst of the opiate crisis. And he said to me, hey, listen, our med runs are so high, but we're really having a hard time getting to, the bee stings and the broken ankles and things like that he goes, we want to try something called paramedicine. We siphon off the non-emergency calls so they can come to your house, wrap your ankle, put it on ice, and then you don't need to go to the emergency room. Well, it actually had a significant drop in our med runs. Now we can concentrate on the people that really need to go to the hospital. I think that same approach needs to come to how we look at policing. And you're right, I don't have all the answers tonight or today, but I think we need to look at that whole concept and say, what are the calls for service that you're going to?
Yeah.
Have we asked them to go to all of the ones because you dial 911 and then they come? That creates this whole other effect.
Yeah.
So when you say defund police, like I said, I don't like the verb, but I definitely like looking at the organization and saying, okay, what's really their mission and what should they be doing? And then taking some of that out and saying, that's best served by somebody. QRTs were another one that kind of happened out of Cincinnati and Hamilton. We took a social worker, a medic, and a police officer to somebody that left the emergency room from an opiate addiction and an overdose, and we went to them and said, listen, here's your options. You know what I mean? Let's find you a bed in treatment.
Yeah.
Let's do this, and then you don't have to necessarily go through, get arrested, get a record, and get all those things. We could never arrest our way out of the issue, which we can never do with any issue.
Yeah.
I think that same concept we can take to how the police do their job. As I said, I don't have all the answers just by Saturday or by Monday, but like I said, it's just the verb part of it because it makes it look like, well, we're just going to get rid of them and use the money somewhere else.
Yeah.
That's not what I want to do, but we definitely want to look at us as an organization across the city and say, okay, let's do what we're supposed to do, let's do it well, and go from there.
Yeah, because again, defund, and I agree with you, there's no way any individual rightfully would want to defund or get rid of their police department because, again, when an emergency, when someone is breaking into their house, if something of that nature is taking place, you want the police to be able to handle that situation.
Absolutely.
I think around some of the things that potentially could be addressed. So I know for a period of time, I worked as security in North High School for APS. And I know that we had officers there in the morning and then officers there in the evening. And again, maybe when you talk about de-escalating issues at a high school or middle school. Now, the reality is in today's times with school shootings that we've had, that's a whole different piece.
We started to talk about those too because I
Correct.
see other departments saying, okay, we're not going to go into schools. Okay, but
So you have that concern. But I also think when it comes to mental health, that sometimes officers are being sent into a mental health situation that, again, to your point, is there another way or possibly, could we appropriate some funds, if not already doing so, to kind of put together a group or a resource so that we start to distinguish what these calls really are? Because, again, is a police officer's duty to go and de-escalate a mental health crisis that's in place.
And you want to use the right tool or the right resource to be able to address the issue.
Absolutely.
If it is a crime, you want to be able to respond to that. If it's something else, the perception that here comes the person with a badge, that throws your different dynamic. And I'm just talking from a perception level. Maybe it's not someone like that. And it's all of those. And I honestly, we just had a fairly frank discussion on Monday about how does this all going to work? Because quite frankly, as we put that task force together, I want them to come up with some concrete solutions to say, listen, these are the things that you need to move forward with. Now, whether it is on policing or whether it is on hiring, a lot of those things, but it also takes organizations to say, listen, this is the way we're going to do things, and then go ahead and start doing them. There's conversations on the national level, there's conversations on the state level, and there's conversation on the local level. What we don't want to do is just trip over ourselves to do all of those things too. It's not an excuse, but we're going to have I think a strong local team saying, to me, I think it's a phenomenal idea. Just something like that. How do we move towards that so we relieve some of those pressures?
Absolutely.
So,
I want to get to, because we got a question from the community I want to address.
Okay.
Getting back to the George Floyd situation, the Breonna Taylor situation, where you have a police shooting or an incident like George Floyd where life has been taken by an officer. We understand that when investigations usually go forth, you may have the prosecutor or the police themselves investigating. How do you feel, or what are your thoughts on an independent investigation, or again, a way, does it make sense for the police to investigate the police in situations like that? And
with our role as police auditor, and I would even say that, and this is a fair assessment, I think, of anybody, have we augmented that enough to be able to reduce the the fears of people saying, well, they're just going to, they're just going to cover up for themselves. And not to say that they did, but that's the perception, is that, hey, can you police yourself? And so I know eons ago, maybe 10 or 12 years ago, we talked about a citizens review board that would do just that. As a group of mayors, we've talked with the governor's office, because he actually had this idea and he wanted to fund it. And this was 4 years ago, about having an outside agency investigate all police shootings, no matter what. We've been a pretty strong advocate on that end, just to increase the level of transparency, to say, this is what we found. This is all their policies and procedures. Did they follow them? And this happened. And then we hold ourselves accountable to say, yeah, it either was justified or was not, based on an outside view. I don't think that stops their internal review, but I think we need a concurrent outside view to say, this is what I'd like to see. Those are part of some discussions that obviously I think we're having at a state level, but even at a local level. How does that work? And augmenting that transparency. I'm more than happy for someone to say, you were wrong, or you didn't do it right. Okay, because we're not going to get everything right. It's about having, I think, a system in place that ensures to the community, yes, I trust that system. It's not a flip of a coin or a flip of a switch, but I think we can increase those levels astronomically with a couple of different tweaks.
And Mayor, so I'll get to the first question that's been asked, and I definitely want you to address it. Is it safe for African Americans, since we are so greatly affected? I'm assuming this question is surrounding police, but I'll do it both ways. I'll surround it around police, but also COVID.
I would say yes and yes. Everybody's going to bring to the table what their perception is of their interaction with the police officer. Listen, I met plenty of people at the protest that they didn't feel safe. And the worst thing that I don't like is, I don't like people to be afraid. I don't like people to be in fear. I can't necessarily correct what happened in 2000 or 2010, and it's not an excuse. It's just that was going to be their interaction at that particular time. How can you give me a way that I can help that? I mean, I've been as good of a listener as a talker. I'm sorry I drone on sometimes. No. But I think, yes, I do think it's safe. I think most go out there to try to do that job, but is the institution set up in a way that I think is responsive enough to be able to say, especially the concerns that we have now. And you saw the murder of a man. I mean, I think Senator Sykes put it best when he said, I can't breathe. He started and ended his speech with, I can't breathe. And I can't tell you that if somebody out here, or you or me, and I said to you, listen, I can't breathe, your first reaction would be, can I get you some help? You would think it would be. And it's been far too long that has happened. And so when you address those things, those aren't, yes, I do feel it's safe. I do. Now, am I going to be able to convince everybody with a 45-minute podcast? I don't think so. I think we continue to try to work on that, because I think our relationships matter. And it is about those relationships that we have and being better. Around COVID, I would even say, you have to ask yourself, what is the risk that you're willing to take to go do this? And so, but if you follow those guidelines, those have been pretty succinct. And quite frankly, we're trying to increase testing, specifically right here. I mean, maybe not right here at the church, but all over, specifically in the minority community, because where are we seeing infection rates? Higher in the minority community. So we want people to get tested. We want the antibody test. In fact, I have a 6:30 a.m. call tomorrow with the governor's office to say, we need 4 more locations. We have one at Broadway. We have one out in Coventry. We need 2 more fairly quick in and around where people can get to on a bus line where they can get a free test, or they can get a test that's picked up by their healthcare provider. We want that access, and we've been pushing for it for months.
Yeah, and I know, because I was just on a call the other day that the chamber did, and County Executive Shapiro was on there. And I had heard them mention about 2 locations in Green for testing. And I know one, I believe they're currently working with the House of the Lord as far as to do that. So I do know, those type of things that happen. Another question around COVID, economically, what impact has COVID-19 had on the city of Akron? Are there specific services that will be affected?
It has been significant across the country. Our current rates, our current projection is that the things that we usually have is about 7% down, which is a little bit lower than I would have expected at this point. As people start to go back to work, we've gotten some help from the state and from they've passed some money to the county. We're working with the federal government to say, these are the services that we want to provide. We stopped bulk pickup for about almost 2 months. our rec centers were absolutely the key. I mean, I would have opened the pool yesterday. I mean, I'm big on water sports. I'm big on kids being able to get to a pool or a splash pad, and we've just had to delay it. They'll open back up probably I think it's right in the beginning of July. So yeah, we'll have an impact on the services. We've tried to protect, I think, those core things that we do, and I think we do well. And then we really had to, like Lock 3, there's no events this year. Rubber Ducks are canceled until the governor says, hey, you can start to go back to baseball games. So overarching, I mean, we have a real question is that, are we going to be able to pay everybody for the rest of the year? Because if nobody goes back to work and we don't collect income taxes, we're all going to be, it's like, we don't think that's going to happen, but I think I plan for the worst. And then kind of ease back and go from there, but we've had to make a significant impact, and those are the things that I want to do the most. I want kids to have programming in the summer, which is camps are opening next week. I want them to be able to play baseball and to be able to play football and enjoy a pool and a splash pad. Unfortunately, and maybe that's part of the problem. Maybe we should have cut something else as opposed to those things, but it still had to do with a lot of people being around each other, and that was our overarching thing as we started to address COVID.
Well, and you just educated me on something that I had not thought about, and for many, who are joining us, again, if we don't go back to work again, cities need those income taxes in order to take care or pay for many of those services, the street and potholes that we complain about.
That I'll be more than happy to fix, just tell me where they are.
So I think that is very important, as we look going forward and getting the communities, safely back to the places, but we also have to consider some of the tough decisions because cities have to balance budgets, states have to balance budgets. I wish the federal government, had to take similar steps, but that's a different conversation for a different day. You mentioned, and again, I'll even share as the discussion is going around about racism as a public health crisis, which I know Representative Amelia Sykes has advocated for and continues to push for. I do think we're still having discussion around how that specifically impacts the African American community and other minorities communities. So I'm not sure there's a definite answer, but I guess I'll pose it to you this way. What substantial, what things that we could put our hands on when you talk about making racism a public health crisis? What tangible things at least run through your mind could we do and could we impact?
Everything, and I think I may have mentioned just a little bit earlier, when we talk about the equity and the investment into neighborhoods and investment into business districts and infant mortality, that to me I think just scratches the surface. That's I'm not saying it's the minimum, but I think we have to go even deeper to say, okay, if we have this zoning policy or if we have this policy to say, why do we have that? And if we don't ask ourselves that particular question, each and every one, I like to start on infant mortality, on health, on investment into neighborhoods, because I think it shows a difference. I think you have to be there, but it's even more than that. I mean, as people, should we be that? There's a social safety net through the county. I think we have to rethink everything about where those dollars go and how they're allocated. We have to keep. Seniors want to stay in their home, and they want. And my mom, who wants to stay in her home, can she do that? And can we keep people in a safe neighborhood? And everybody wants to say we want to make data-driven decisions. I can show you all the data you want from the last 60 years of the things that we have done and the policies that we have advocated for and what are the outcomes that have happened. We've had vulnerable populations, we've had poor housing, we've had poor health outcomes. It's not a mystery anymore. Nobody's saying, well, no, if you would have just done this. No, it's deeper than that, but I want to affect I want to affect kids. I want to affect people to be able to find employment. I think it's a gateway to say, okay, I that part of my life is stable. Maybe I can do this, or maybe I can do that. Those are two big things that I think are impactful in how we do it.
Well, and so tell us about even some of the things I know I've either read or had conversations with you about. I know we've talked about a police substation, even in the West Side neighborhood, which I know we're taking steps toward. Great streets. I just saw it because I just did it with my wife, that you can mow the property that's adjacent to you, and there's a potential that you could own. So tell us about some of that. I think you've even added cameras and changing lights. So talk to me about some of those things that the city has done, when you talk about minority communities or even like the west side of Akron, which, the church is currently located in.
Well, I think to me it started with infant mortality in the very beginning, and I know this is a space that Amelia has been in for quite a while. And when we saw some of those numbers, I specifically went out and raised money from our healthcare providers and from nonprofits and hired Tamika Rose, who's been phenomenal in saying, okay, these are the things that these unwed mothers need, or they could be wed, but they're pregnant and younger. They need a safe space to be able to go. They need to be able to get through a full term first birthday, because getting to your full term gives you more of an opportunity to get to your first birthday. And we've seen our numbers drop, just not drop enough. And so it's a year and a half. The other big thing we just announced today was procurement reform. We spend as a city probably close to $500 or $600 million, and our spend in the minority community is abysmal. For small businesses, because we set up this system that says you got to put a sealed bid in, you got to show up on a Wednesday at 10 o'clock, and then we tell you the truth, we went over 18 months. And we went to 3 or 4 different communities that have done procurement reform, and we said to ourselves, okay, if this is going to be serious and we're going to open up the opportunity for small businesses, how are we going to do it? So we're going to do a specific charter change to our charter to say this is not, and it's about a 4 or 5 page piece of legislation, and if I could read the whole thing now, I would take up the rest of the time, but the bottom line is it's going to make it easier for small and minority-owned businesses to do business with the city, with whatever you're going to do. I don't care if it's food, I don't care if it's concrete, I don't care if it's bobby pins, whatever you provide that we need to increase that percentage. It's abysmal now, and if we don't take some of those reforms, people are just going to still say, it's the same old thing. You know what I mean? I'm not going to get my opportunity. Now, there's a database. We're working with the chamber. The county has supplied money to do this. It's a reform effort to say, here's your opportunities. How do we get you bonded? How do we get you a smaller, no-interest loan so your company can go from X to X? And so, to me, I think that is significant, but it's just one small piece of the puzzle.
And again, things like Elevate Akron, literally trying to change the plight of many, who are dealing with.
And right. And listen, if you have a business idea and you think, you know what, I should talk to somebody about insurance. And that insurance person says, well, listen, for your idea, I'll trade you insurance for this or for that. And so we've seen a significant number of people go to Bounce and I think get that advice of how to take yours from one step to the next. The number one business opening is African American women are opening their businesses, at 36% of entrepreneurs. If we can't get behind that, that's a huge percentage of new businesses, 36. Let's get behind whatever they want to do. And listen, the literal definition of an entrepreneur is the risk taker. So they're taking a risk. But you know what, though? We should help mitigate that risk. And I think we should as a community, and we are, not only with procurement reform, but with Bounce and with Elevate Akron. It's about getting in there, and I think doing some of that hard work.
Because to your point, that's how you really start to deal with racism when you talk about racism as a public health crisis. It is literally allowing people who are Black, Asian, Native American opportunities to, again, have equality in areas where there necessarily has been inequality. And even in some places where there's been injustice. So again, I think to what you're sharing, addressing some of those needs, helps us to begin to tear down that barrier when you start to talk about race and racism in everyday society.
When you talk about and I think anybody's perception of public service and government is that we're always just in the way. And so I probably have talked to hundreds of business owners that said, why do I need to do this? Why did you have that regulation? We need to change the perception that we're in the way. Now, is there something that you need to do? You need to fill out a form just to let us know that this is where you are and do those things. Those are minimal on that barrier to entry, but we need to make those as easy as possible and help with funding. We can't sit there and say, good luck, good luck with the landlord. We need to be there. I think that changes the perception that we're here to help, not hurt. Is every idea going to work? I don't think so. But the more that I think we try, I think the better off we are.
A few more questions I have for you. And again, thank you all so much. Continue to submit your questions in the comment section. I hope you all are enjoying the conversation.
I hope you are. I hope I'm not putting you to sleep.
Absolutely. And I expect before we're done that you have a question for us that we'll definitely address. Okay. But Mayor, you started to touch on something that came up recently, not too long ago, before we started dealing with COVID and then this, and that was evictions. So what are we doing now to deal with that high eviction rate that we're starting to see in our city?
These are one of those things that are systemic across, if somebody can't go to work, they can't pay their bills. one of the things that have been impactful, and this is because of the federal government, and I'm not blaming them, even though they should be, because we have its consent decree, we have high water bills. High water and sewer bills that have make it almost impossible. We set aside a specific amount of money to help people. I literally went out and knocked on a lot of doors to say, you know what, we're going to have people in an eviction crisis. We're going to have people not going to be able to pay their water bill. And we're going to put a significant amount of money through a private donation who wants to remain anonymous for people to be able to pay their bills and help with the eviction. We have to work with the courts because they're either going to grant that eviction or they're not. And I'm sure landlords are just kind of waiting to say, you know what, I've got to move these people out because I want to get another tenant in. Our point is, wait a minute. If they're behind a month or two, let us help them get to the 2 months, and then you can start your clock again. But it's more of a joint effort across to say, okay, to the courts, once you get a filing, let us know so we can contact and the United Way has done really good work in this, in the food and in the eviction and the water. Just call 211. If you're having any issue, and I would say that 100 times, if you're having any issue, whether it's with evictions or with water or with anything that we may be able to help you on, not necessarily the city, but also jobs and family services, business support, call 211. If they can't get you the answer, they'll get it for you. That's kind of the general information line for kind of help. Ours is 311 to say, you forgot to pick up my trash, we need a pothole, and obviously 911 is for that emergency.
Yeah.
But we're going to put a significant amount of money towards that eviction, to the eviction monies, and we're trying to raise more because it's we can use some CARES Act money, and obviously we're working with the federal government to say, we have a hole here. If you want to see a bunch of people on the street, your homeless population pick up, all of these other ills that may happen if you kick people out, we can help people. Let us help them. And so far, I'm not saying it's not going to tick up. I'm not going to say we're going to be able to help everybody, but there's a process for us to be able to help. We don't want to be in the way. So,
No, excellent. Let me jump back to our other topic. Mayor, what changes are you willing or planning to make with the police department based upon what has happened in Minneapolis and across our nation?
well, you know what? I think we started on some of those when it comes to the hiring part and when it comes to the training part. Now it comes to a deeper conversation of I think it gets back to your question from before, is that what are they really there for? And I can tell you, I can't say we're going to specifically do this right now. But I know we're talking about a lot of those things, and there's a group of us across the state of Ohio. It's big city mayors. There's like 7 or 8 of us that are working with the Kerwin Institute out of Ohio State and Department of Public Safety and the governor's office. And we have some ideas of how do we get those reforms institutionalized. There's also, the governor's talked about, a police officer leaving one department for a nefarious reason and then being able to go to another. To me, that's not a good idea for them to be able to do that. There's also 88 counties and kind of hundreds of police departments. Not that they don't have a say in the matter, but we're going to make some specific things of what do we want to see out of an Akron police officer. Do you have the right training? Do you have the right psychological backup? Are we going to talk about those things? And then also, I think on that support end, when it comes to, it was not in the military, I was not in the fire department, I was not in the police department. I know it's not an unstressful job. You see things that are just, that you have to go and see.
Yeah.
How do we provide that support on that end too? I think that's worthy of the conversation. We have programs to be able to help with that now. How do we augment those? I think our mental health as a community, we can't be afraid to talk about our mental health because I think there's a stigma to that too. And plus, there's a stigma of wearing a uniform and saying, I need help. It's real.
Yeah. Yes.
And not a lot of people want to say, I need help. My wife's in the mental health field and it's very busy right now, and her services are in demand. It's where we are as a community, but we need to show to the community we're listened. These are the things that we're doing because we don't want to see those things. We want that interaction to be as bad as it may be on a personal level for you. It shouldn't be worse on that other end, and so we want those representatives out there doing that.
Yeah, and you bring up an excellent point. When you get to places of authority, mayor, pastor, police officer, who do we have to talk to when we have those stressful moments or, those moments where we're ready to snap and break, and we shouldn't bring that to work. So I absolutely agree with you. What's their release point, whether it be from a mental standpoint or others. Let me, something else you brought up that I wanted to talk about as it related to that, and that is when it comes to policing and hiring. One of the things that nationally they started to talk about is building a database. How do we or do we currently have something in place that if we've had a bad officer in Syracuse, New York, who now lost their job there, but is now seeking to become a police officer here in Akron at APD, do we have a process to make sure we are aware?
We have through that background check, and I can say with almost certainty, but please don't hold me to 100% because something may have happened 20 years ago that I don't know about. With almost certainty,
Because people think about Tamir Rice in that situation.
exactly, they went from one place to another, almost with a certainty that we're not going to take somebody that has been fired from or let go of because of something like that, and obviously, we did a couple of things, I think, specifically to help on that training part of it. We raised the age to 40, because a little bit of salt doesn't necessarily hurt, and that maturity does not necessarily hurt when you're out there, I think, on that side. We also started to pay them. We didn't pay police recruits until, like, I did it. You know, Margot and I sat down and we said, listen, we need to change the perception here. So from day one, they're making $26, $22 an hour. That's $56,000 a year, which is a very good job right now. I mean, if you want to go do something else and make $1 million, I'm not going to stop you, but that's a very good start. And you can start when you're 21, so there's a little bit more responsibility there. We wanted to change on those things on the training side. Plus, we put our own academy back. I mean, we were being trained by outside trainers and paying them. We took that back, assigned more officers to training, gave them the appropriate, I think that the psychological part and some of the like implicit bias stuff, and have them go through those on a situational basis. But to me, it's like a refresher course. Just because you're a physics major doesn't mean you need to read the most current article of what's happening in physics. Same thing, I think, with police. We need to stay up to date on that side too. What are the mental health stresses? What are the psychological looking points that we need to be looking at? And I think on that side, we can always do better, but I'm almost to a certainty that we have not taken an officer. That I can certainly check and let you know.
No, great.
But that process is there.
And so with that, let me add, and you may not have the specifics because that's, you have a chief of police. But when you talk about formal complaints against officers, is there a limit to, when do we get to a place where if we have so many, we need to do a certain review or?
There's a discipline process as by through the Office of Professional Standards. That's also us policing us. And so I think it goes back to your other point, kind of, who is kind of watching over that point. But as a movement, it's going there where people want to say, listen, if you're going to talk about transparency and accountability, what are those efforts to do that? Me just telling you, don't worry about it. I don't think that is enough anymore. Even outside of the auditor's perspective, what else is in there? We can't say, well, listen, we're going to check this box tomorrow, but there is a pretty specific review of saying, okay, what's the complaint? Where's the body camera footage? And then getting context from there. I think the body camera program has across the country, and I know still somebody still don't have it, and I'm asking why? Why wouldn't you invest in that insurance? Because not that people are going to say, well, listen, he did this or she did that, but that gives you that, the context of what all happened, and I think that it helps both sides. It provides both sides with an insurance to say, somebody can watch this because it's a public record, but also maybe he or she didn't do that, and I can't just do that. So I think it's been a very helpful program for police departments across the country.
Excellent. So one final question for you this evening, and again, thank you so much for your time, as I know you're a busy man with much to do. Has there been enough COVID-19 testing in Summit County to know if there has been a big change in numbers since businesses have opened back up? Short answer, no.
And I would mention, too, that we do have another COVID testing site over at Walgreens right over on West Market Street. I want to increase that. And it's not to say that we need to have more, because I think with the testing, you can start to contact trace a little bit better, and you can really find out. I would love to know if I did or if I didn't, but they don't have that one test yet on the antibody test to be able to do it. So I still take those precautions. I always want to test more. In fact, if it was my idea, I'd test everybody in the city of Akron more than once. And I would find a way to pay for it, because the federal government's given us all this money. I think we should keep testing until we get to a point where it's like, where it's the flu. And it's not so much, because it's not. To a lot of people, it is not the flu. It's deadly. And so how do you deal with that before a vaccine? I think we need more testing. I pushed the governor ad nauseum for weeks about we need to increase testing, and that's my 6:30 call tomorrow. So,
excellent. See if I can get another question in. Is there a residency requirement? And again, you may not know these details
I know.
for the city of Akron
Yeah.
As relates to police or fire service.
Well, I tell you, that's a fight that that young man down there fought for a long time. I'm a big fan of residency. We lost that in court. In fact, the former mayor fought it all the way to the Supreme Court and wanted to have residency. I would love to be able to do it again. It's just a legal way that we can't provide. I think I think city and I know Mr. Armstrong maybe not agree with me. I think they should live in the city. I mean, it's the public that you serve, and it's the neighborhood that you're in. I think it gives you more ownership. We lost that battle, but to tell you the truth, I don't mind. But we on the flip side, we actually incentivize new home building. So a lot of times people don't respond to the enforcement part. Would they respond to an incentive? And I think even economically, can we do that to incentivize people to say, yeah, I do want to live in the city. There's a lot of other factors involved, whether it's space and schools and all that stuff. I think we can incentivize it just even more to make that happen. So
Well, and so to think about that, which I agree, I would love there to be a residency requirement when you talk about a police officer policing a community, again, in which they don't reside in or have not been in long enough to even know. But I think we have to also be conscious of the fact, as important as that position is, I would hope that if there's a great job in Columbus at The Ohio State University as a bursar or anything else, and I have an opportunity that I don't have to stay in Columbus or have lived in Columbus for 6 months before I could get that position. So I do understand the nuances, but I would love there to be a residency requirement as it comes to officers, but I do think we have to think logically,
But what we do is we offer 20 points on the exam. You know what I mean? We and that's going to be a charter change. No, they still get it. But if you live in the city of Akron and I think you have to stay for a certain number of years, you get 20 points. That is significant into the testing scores to say we want our residents to have those jobs. We want our residents to have all the jobs that are in here. How do we incentivize that part of it? And to me, that's part of procurement. That's part of bounce. That's part of HR. That's part of all of those different things. I think that incentivize that behavior as opposed to saying you can get a job anywhere you want, you can live everywhere you want. That's not what I want. But unfortunately, like I said, we lost that case. I'm going to say 8-9 years ago. I don't know the exact date, but it was just not too long ago.
One final question I will ask you. Is there a way that police, in your view, in your mind, can collaborate? The question says, of course, with mental health agencies to de-escalate, but I also say as communities. Is there a way that police, in your mind, could collaborate with communities, with leaders, with residents? How can we better build that relationship?
I think that's part of that discussion to say. Now, I'm not saying that they don't, because we do about 300 events a year in our communities. Is that enough? That's my only question. And I'll say the same thing. If I did this time and it didn't get the result that I needed. So if we're in the community for 300 events a year, but we're still having that perception of what, people in the community may think about us, maybe it's a different way to look at, how we're interacting with the community. So is it somebody walking down the street, a couple hours a day, whether it's down Copley Road or North Main Street or South Main Street or wherever? Is it something like that? That's that whole concept of how we provide that service, but also change that perception that we're here. And that collaboration with mental health, I think, can be even deeper. Many of our officers are CIT trained, which is there's cues to look for on how you deal with people who have mental health problems. And a lot of our officers are trained that way. I don't necessarily think all of them are. But I think on the patrol side, yes, I think the relationship needs to go even deeper. How that happens, because we have a levy-funded ADM board that says, okay, these are the mental health resources. There are a tremendous number of collaborations that I think we can start to seek to say, okay, this is not necessarily a police thing, but it is a safety thing. And so how do we have the right person using, like I said, I think the right resource or the right tool to be able to address the issue. So Mayor, I've asked you a ton of questions. Is there a question that you necessarily have for me before we get done this evening? Listen, first, I thank you for doing this. The dialogue is always important, but I think it goes even past that, especially now. I would ask you and all of you in the audience, if you think, if we're not getting it done, let me know. I have no problem you saying, that's not. Now, I may not agree with you, and whether it's somebody in the audience or yourself, I may try to argue, but this is how I went about my decision making. I have no problem with that part. If it's still wrong, if it's not the outcome that we want, I don't think we can just look at metrics anymore, because we can see those. We have a ton of metrics to say this is where we are, and it's not good. in some of the, it's not good. And how do we change those metrics and not just look at metrics, but say, these are people that we have. These are, and I think, Linda may have said it, I think the other day, Linda Mobian, when did we lose that basic interaction with a human being to see that person just because their hair color is different, their skin is different? There's some uncomfortable conversations, even more coming. Yeah. You have to be uncomfortably comfortable because if you're not willing to be in that position, I think it's time to say, okay, but that's not the right one for you. Yeah. It's going to take a lot, and I'm not afraid of that. I'm not going to be afraid in my own community. I'm going to go where I need to go and be able to be. That availability, I think, that's just me. Somebody's going to do it different. I understand that. That's just us. And so we're going to continue to do that.
So, Mayor, finally, I've heard you. I've been at probably, I think, 3 rallies that the two of us have been engaged in. I've heard you share things with the community. Real quick before we get out of here tonight, what do you want the people to know? The protest part of it too. People talk about, well, I have a First Amendment right. Yes, but I am extremely proud of our. I don't know how to put this. Our protesters and the leaders of those protests. Yes, it was angry. Yes, it was raw, and yes, it was painful. But you know what though? They preached from very on high that this is a peaceful demonstration. We had one small evening, about 99.9% of it. Of any city across Ohio, you're not going to see the effect that I think we've had here. It's because I think that we have been out there, and this is not a pat on my back. This is not about me. And I told that to every time I got the microphone. This is not about me. This is about yourselves. And we're here to support that. What are those changes coming? The other part of it too is that if it's not about me, if you continue to protest, which is fine, and we're going to support that right to be able to do it safely, please keep that peaceful mindset on that. There's a lot of people that want to see that change. We're gonna do those things, and so are we gonna do as fast as what people want? Probably not, because I just don't think there's the patience level that's there, and that's where we are, I think, as a community. But we're gonna listen, and we're gonna do those things, and we all have a limited amount of time of what we're gonna do. So my time is gonna be spent, making those changes that I think are gonna impact people's lives in a positive way, the most and the best. Mayor, I appreciate that, and as we talked, before off camera, and I'll share with everyone again, I appreciate all that you do. We also have a responsibility. We can only do this together. I think,
absolutely.
For us as the Black community, we have to begin to put together what it is that we want to see and make that known to all of our elected officials. We also have to vote. I know some of my young people challenge me with that. We have to vote. There is power in our vote. We have to take our privilege, and we have to make sure that we do that. If there's someone in office that is not doing the job, we have to make sure that we're doing our part to get them out of office. That is done through our vote. But we also, in this moment, have to begin to verbalize, but also begin to push our elected officials toward the change that we seek, even in legislation. So we still have to do our part. Church, community, I understand we're angry. I understand we're frustrated, rightfully so. We now have to put that into tangible things that we want to see done in our communities, and we have to be a part of that. I think as we shared tonight, I understand that there's a disconnect right now between many of our young Black men and young Black women when it comes to policing. But these are our communities, and we always say we would love to have officers in our communities that look like us, that are policing us, because they understand us. Again, Mayor, we grew up on different sides of the block, but I know the same way that Brother Marco Somerville knows that me getting loud or me encountering somebody loud in my neighborhood does not mean that they're aggressive. Some of us are just loud. That's just how we are. But everyone doesn't understand that. Everyone doesn't understand that approach. So again, I think we also have to begin to push those in our community, those even young individuals, to aspire to be in some of these roles that, again, we've demonized, even in our own communities. If we want to see this type of change happen, we have to be a part of that change. I just can't lay it all on the mayor's shoulder. I can't just lay it all on the county's shoulders. We also have to make sure each and every day we're doing our part to bring about the difference, the change that we say we want to happen. And it starts with the conversation, a difficult one, an uncomfortable one at times, but one that's needed. and we have to respect one another. I think, Mayor, one of the things I wanted to mention earlier, and we'll get out of here, is I think for the community as well as the police, we have to get to the place where we don't see each other as enemies.
I don't disagree.
The people we encounter, George Floyd is not my enemy. Breonna Taylor, that's not my enemy. The police officer is not my enemy. And when we start to look at each other as human beings, as neighbors, I'm going to go Bible just a little bit. Scripture tells us that my responsibility first is to love God with all my heart, all my soul, all my being. But secondly, is like unto the first, to love my neighbor as I love myself. I think, Mayor, what we've lost is that love for neighbor.
It doesn't qualify it by saying, just love your neighbor because they're left-handed, or love your neighbor because they have the same color skin as you. It doesn't say that. I don't ever read it there. The one myth that's out there, I think, is that I have the power. Well, I make those decisions in that 4-year period. But the real power rests with people. And if people voted in the numbers that they, if everybody just voted, you would see things, I think, differently. I know they don't trust the system, but there's a way to change it. And that's by saying, listen, we don't want you, we want this person. And we as elected officials have to sit there and say, okay, we're not bequeathed this job. Nobody gave it to us. We went out and we ran and we won, but that's a whole nother argument. That power rests with, and you see where voting rates are, and sometimes they're very low, especially among younger people. They voted 18%. And people, older, 60, they voted 65%. There's your gap. Vote.
Absolutely.
And it's not about me. Don't vote for, I don't want to say that out loud, but you know what I'm trying to say. It's about what you go out and exercise. I want to thank you for taking the time and welcome me. I always feel home here. It's always a good discussion. It'll always be a good discussion, so I appreciate it. So
thank you. I appreciate you so much. So family, thank you so much for joining us on tonight. Before we get out of here, of course, we want to have a word of prayer. Our Father and our God, we thank you so much for this evening. God, I thank you for the mayor of this great city. I thank you for all that you're doing through him. God, continue to protect him, cover his mind, cover his heart. God, cover his family. God, help him, give him guidance, give him understanding as he continues to lead this city. God, we thank you for all that we were sharing on tonight. God, help us as a nation, help us as a world to begin to change into the people you've called us to be. God, help us to be able to look at one another as neighbors, as brothers and sisters, not as enemies. God, if we ever needed you before, we need you right now. God, we thank you. We lift up to all those families who are grieving because they've lost loved ones due to COVID. We ask, dear God, that you comfort their hearts. God, bless every community. Bless every family. Bless every person. For they have been fearfully and wonderfully made in your image. God, we thank you. God, we love you. It's in Christ's name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Family, thank you all again so much. Stay safe, and we will see you soon.